in-house with, getting our communications team. And I should mention Amy Mooney as well does quite a bit of work on it. So just keeping that done in-house saves a lot of money.
Great.
So as far as community engagement, you're telling me that we're ready to go? Well, I'm just interested. Are there ways where we could distribute a copy to certain organizations around town?
Yeah.
So it would be accessible to different demographics that, as I say, may not have that digital access that we often take for granted.
Yeah, well, the library always gets a copy.
Perfect.
So they have one from every year. You could go and look at them all if you wanted to. So that's a great place to go and check it out.
Don't want to come to the second floor of City Hall, just go over to the library. And when do we know, will they be available? I saw
They should be available.
Printed? Yeah,
Oh, okay.
pretty quick, eh?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I checked last week and they
Okay.
said they were at the printer maybe, but I didn't know when they were
Yeah.
coming back. Awesome. Okay. And are we going through everything again? Can we just jump to
It's a whole new agenda.
adoption of the agenda? Seems redundant to,
Yeah, I think it's a different meeting.
yeah. Okay. Are there any late items for this particular meeting?
I think we have to,
She's doing.
Now we're having issues with the, let me just see if I can get in there. From here. I do. Sebastian, can you look on the TV? It should be on that laptop.
The one with the new password.
Yeah, I think so.
My stickers. I don't know.
This thing?
You got the one for us.
I got it from Doris. It's got stacks of them.
Oh, nice.
So cute.
Yeah, Kabulas are cute.
Is that it? No?
I didn't get recall.
Talk about Kamloops.
No, it's.
Hot mess.
So are we online, Sarah?
We're live, but we're just waiting.
We are live and online, coming to you from downtown City of Nelson. Is there anything else council would like to share with the residents of our fair town right now?
nope.
As we experience some technical difficulties. I did nothing to cause this. I just changed seats
We need one of those old
temporarily.
school cable television things that popped up and just said, please stand by.
Please stand by. Because you won't want to miss what's coming up next.
Does she have one, Chris?
Well, there's this one here, we could try.
Maybe we should try it.
Yeah. You wanna try that? Okay. And it's just trying one right now, is that? Yeah. Okay.
I could do a couple of public service announcements.
Did we could adopt the agenda.
We could.
Let's
That's
do
what
that,
I'm
yeah.
asking if we, okay. So we've called the meeting to order.
Okay, perfect.
And can we adopt the agenda? Moved by Councillor Page, seconded by Councillor Woodward. All those in favor? Good with the agenda. I did ask for late items. Nothing was raised. There's no previous meeting minutes, and we have development services here to do a workshop around short-term rentals. Are we technologically able to show
There we
the
go.
show?
All right.
Woohoo!
Good time.
Okay.
Success.
So, am I reading something on this one? Oh, nope. It's just over to you. It's a workshop. You're going to tell us what we need to know. And more.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So, yeah, I'd like to do kind of an overarching run-through of our short-term rental regulations within the City of Nelson. We have a few new council members, so I'd just like to give everybody a quick run through. You know, the short-term rental regulations in the city of Nelson are pretty complicated and nuanced, and it's great for everyone to have a bit more of a foundational understanding of how these work and how they impact our city. So for short-term rentals. So what is exactly a short-term rental? So these are homes, suites, and rooms in a residential area in the city. So one of our residential neighborhoods, and that's for rent to the public. And the short part of short-term rental is less than 31 days. So short-term stays of less than a month at a time. And these are, a commercial use. So rental, it's a commercial use. There's an exchange of money. And that's occurring in a residential zone. So it's a commercial use in a residential zone. And these are being regulated by a number of bylaws, including the business license bylaw, the parking bylaw, and our zoning bylaw. And typically they can look like a lot of different things, but typically they do look like a basement suite, similar to this, standard living area. And then these are rented out on a short-term basis. And then you'd probably see them on Airbnb and a variety of different rental platforms. And then kind of the flip side of that, another shorter-term rental application is tourist accommodation, which is also a commercial use. And this is also when buildings or rooms are rented for accommodation to the public, and that's, again, 30 days or less. And typically these are occurring in a commercial mixed-use zone, usually in association with, or in addition to some kind of commercial use, like retail or restaurants. So these are operating as a commercial use, similar to short-term rentals. These are operating within a commercial zone of the city or a mixed-use zone of the city. So these are a short-term rental that you're seeing in the downtown core. And these are operated and regulated similarly through the same bylaws, the business license bylaw, the parking and zoning bylaws. So they can look very similar, they can look very different to short-term rentals. We can see here in this building that is a heritage home. It was converted. We have a tattoo shop, a commercial use, and then on the upper floor we have a residential rental, which you can see in the images here. It looks very similar to what we saw in the residential zone. So they can look similar. They share a lot of the same amenities, but this is occurring in a commercial zone of the city, so within our downtown. So similar type of function, but they are regulated slightly differently. So putting these together, we can see short-term rentals on the left. We're in residential zones, but we do require a residential or a principal residential use of the property in order for that to comply with zoning. So again, it's a commercial use in a residential area, so there needs to be still a residential use is the dominant use. So there still needs to be a long-term resident on the property. And then for short-term rentals, we do have, they need to get a business license, so there are caps to those licenses. And those come in 3 forms of annual licenses, 4-month and 31-day periods, which I can get into a bit later. And then tourist accommodation, again, in our downtown mixed-use zones, and those do not require a principal resident because that is a compliant use with the zoning already. And then there are no license caps for tourist accommodations. And then there are some similarities there. So they are both business, commercial uses. They both need business licenses. They are both shorter term housing for the public, and they both require a number of regulations like inspections and parking, etc. So looking at some of the trends that we're seeing for short-term rentals in Nelson, this graph can be a little bit complicated, but we do have the 3 types of units that we see that you can rent out, and then we have the 3 types of licenses on the right side. So you can rent out a room, a suite, or a home, and then we have annual licenses, 4-month licenses, and 31-day licenses. And then each of the colors is broken down over the past 5 years. So we look at the light blue bar for 2023. We can see that suites are very popular as they have been. And homes and rooms are relatively stable. And we also see in the light blue bar for 2023 that annual licenses are clearly the highest popularity compared to 4-month and 31-day licenses. So those annual licenses provide a lot of flexibility for property owners. It allows them to rent out their unit throughout the year, gives them a bit more flexibility with when they rent it, when they're going on a trip, for example. So people do appreciate that flexibility. And then comparing that to what our caps are, so these are the real numbers of how many licenses we've issued each year. So we can see just over here we have 80 annual licenses out of our cap of 110 annual licenses. And of the total cap for all of the license types, we have a cap of 150. So we have a cap of 110 annual licenses and 40 4-month licenses, so 150. And of that total cap for licenses, we're at 106 as of 2023. So that's kind of the capacity that we're looking at. That's how much is currently being used. So looking a bit deeper at what these rentals actually mean for housing in Nelson, we can look at the number of homes and suites and building permits that are actually being used for short-term rental. So currently in 2023, we have 32 homes that are being used and operated as short-term rental. So those are homes and condos, and then 50 of the basement suites or secondary suites are being operated as a short-term rental as well. So if we go back and we have a look at this kind of growth projection that we're seeing in this graph, based on, and we're looking at that 106 out of 150. If we continue similar growth patterns and development patterns, and then we see growing travel demand or on-track travel demand, we'd be looking at meeting those license caps maybe by 2028, approximately. So that's what could be expected. And then we can also look into building permits that Development Services has issued and compare the housing stock that's being created and developed, and then what proportion of that is being allocated to short-term rental or converted to a shorter-term rental type of use. So in 2021, we had 36 building permits that were issued for secondary suites, and 8 of those are being used as short-term rental today. And in 2022, we issued 30 building permits for suites, and 4 of those are being used for short-term rental today. And so that gives a good idea of the proportion that we're seeing. It's not exact, but we can get a general idea of the allocation to longer-term rental and the allocation towards short-term rental. And we also see just anecdotally that these short-term rentals are being very helpful for property owners as mortgage helpers. It's very appealing to people to have this supplementary income to help pay for their mortgage with housing prices going the way they're going. This is a great opportunity for people to help pay for that mortgage. So that's anecdotally what we see. So tracking these short-term rentals, we do a weekly review of any new listings with a software called Host Compliance, where we identify any new listings, ensure that they have a business license. If they don't, we begin communication with that property owner. Enforcement takes place if necessary. And ultimately, the applicant applies for a license to operate the short-term rental. Or, if, for example, if they need to bring a suite up to the modern building code, then they'll get a building permit to do that. And also looking into just a general question that I see floating around is, why do we see approximately 200 listings on Airbnb within the Nelson area, which is a very reasonable question. So going back to that graph here, we can see that, okay, we have about 80 annual licenses, we have about 25 4-month licenses, say about 100 active licenses or so. So that 200 listings is broken down by those licensed rentals that are licensed by the city, and then also rentals that are just outside city limits. So it doesn't show an exact address when you look at Airbnb. It shows a general 1 kilometer radius of where that rental is. So we do get plenty advertised that are just outside the city. We also have long-term rentals that we see on Airbnb. It's perfectly legal to rent out your Airbnb or to rent out your unit on Airbnb for longer than 31 days without a business license. That's acceptable. And we also see tourist accommodation as well. So all of those tourist accommodations, all of those listings, you'll see those on Airbnb often as well. So that's kind of the breakdown of what that 200 number actually looks like. But a large chunk of that is licensed rentals by the city. And just One other note on tracking short-term rentals. The province is currently doing some engagement with communities on what their potential role could look like on maybe taking over some of the enforcement or identification responsibilities from municipalities. Maybe that looks like helping to identify listings that don't have a business license, or maybe it is a role potentially looking at enforcement or something like that, somehow to help the management of short-term rentals by cities be a bit more consistent across the board. So that hasn't been fleshed out fully. They're still in the early stages of engagement, but they're hoping to have that more solidified by the end of the year. So just taking a step back here, the regulations from short-term rentals came from the public. So the public came to the city when some of these platforms were becoming bigger, that they wanted to operate these short-term rentals and they wanted this supplementary income. So council directed staff to ultimately look into regulating them, and Nelson does have some of the most stringent and most, I guess, well-respected regulations for short-term rentals. We have a lot of conversations with other municipalities on how we manage things. So generally for recommendations, just observing how these regulations continue to work over time. It seems like the current licenses, the current license caps are appropriate for the demand that we're seeing. We don't have a lineup of people getting licenses, and we don't have a vast number of vacant licenses either. It seems that we have struck something of a balance there. It's also recommended to just wait and see what potential role the province could play in enforcement and tracking short-term rentals. And also staff could potentially explore capping tourist accommodation licenses as well. So those are a typical business license like any hotel, but that can just be any other residential unit in the downtown core. That could be a tourist accommodation as well. So there are some high-level policies in Nelson's guided documents to encourage new housing in Nelson's downtown. So there could be some conflict there between tourist accommodations, new residential units in the downtown core being built and immediately being used as tourist accommodation. There could be some conflict there. So there could be some potential for regulation of those licenses. And that is the general breakdown of short-term rentals.
Okay, questions? Thank you for the report. Lots of interesting information. Councillor Woodward.
Thank you. So I'm interested with this exploring the capping, the tourist accommodations, especially like the downtown, because my memory serves me correctly, there used to be a lot of relatively affordable housing, like on top of buildings on Baker Street, and a lot of those have been turned to Airbnbs. So I'm just wondering, I think we probably have lost a fair amount of affordable rental. People have converted them. But I also know that there is, if we just said, as Councilor Pinero said, like we're not doing Airbnb anymore or something like that, that doesn't necessarily mean that the people who own those suites would want to have long-term rentals. I would imagine people also choose to have short-term rental because it fits their lifestyle or fits what they need. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that it's not necessarily always a choice between long-term rental and short-term rental. There are definitely different requirements for managing those two different types of rentals, and people have historically come across different conflicts with each of those, so it seems to be what fits their lifestyle better, I suppose. So I would say that's accurate.
So, may I have supplemental? So, I guess if it is really up to the owners of the properties to decide what they want to do, and then we have our choice around enforcement. And as you were saying, we have fairly stringent enforcement and capping, which I think is vital in considering our town is so tourist driven. But I do understand that we have probably lost a chunk of rental property that would have been on the market to this process over the last, I don't know, bunch of years. Would you say that's a fair assessment, or do you feel like we have enough controls with what we're doing?
Yeah, it definitely is ultimately up to the property owner to decide whether or not doing a tourist accommodation in a building on Baker is feasible. It's a permitted use, so it's kind of, as long as they bring the unit up to building code, and they have the other regulations set in place, there isn't a lot of hurdles for them to jump through. The licenses are quite accessible. So in that sense, there have been some units that have been lost, that have been converted into tourist accommodation and are now operating on a short-term basis. So whether or not that has been filled by new housing, that demand, or not, is difficult to say for you. Yeah, precisely.
Thank you.
Councillor Page?
I might have a few questions, so bear with me. Sebastian got some of it. I wanted to spread out some of the love. Even though I was talking to you about the annual report based on pages that were in it. So by my numbers, we're looking at about 2% of our building stock or units based on the 4,300 homes we have, based on the 100 units that are currently being used in some capacity as a short-term rental, recognizing, of course, that if someone rents it for 4 months, you're certainly not going to have someone there for a full year rolling into a long-term situation. So it's effectively removing that long-term opportunity. We heard you speak a little bit about the support around paying for the current mortgages that are required in an environment, both nationally, provincially, of elevated, inflated housing costs. I don't think anyone would disagree that Canada is currently sitting in a situation of absolute outrageous housing inflation costs. So do we understand, as more of these units that are coming online are going towards short-term rental than the standing stock, what impact on that housing inflation component and that cost component for our housing is being driven by these opportunities to commodify the portion of the residential market? Mm-hmm. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it's difficult to say, I suppose. We aren't seeing clearly all of our new units being driven towards this shorter term use. Mm-hmm. It definitely, again, is that balance between what's more appropriate for people's lifestyles, and a lot of that is still driven towards short-term rental. So, yeah, in terms of what we're seeing right now, the license caps are appropriate for the level of growth that we're seeing and the level of development that we're seeing, and they suit the projections for housing that we're going to need over the next 20 years.
Can we go to Councillor Taylor?
Yeah, go.
Hi, thanks for the report. Thanks for distilling all this information, because there's a lot of questions that people always have about how many are this or how many are that. Has this been brought to our business community and our employers, hoteliers and such, and have they given you any feedback on the impact that short-term rentals have on their business? Because if we don't have long-term numbers, but based on this slide where 8 of the new BP building permits, thanks, 8 of the 36, which is 22%, or 4 of the 30, which is 13%. So that's higher than the 2% of the total stock. So you're getting any feedback on impact on our employers and hoteliers in the city?
Yeah, I think some engagement in the future would definitely be appropriate. If we were looking to, if council saw it appropriate to consider relaxing or restricting those caps a bit further, then I think it would be appropriate to do some engagement with the business community and with some residents as well. But yeah.
Maybe just a supplemental. I think there's been a few iterations, but I would say the bylaw as it stands today is probably a bit bit more than 5 years old. So yeah, it could be a good time to chat about it. I think this conversation is going to be coming up through the OCP process around housing and what that looks like. And, I think this is probably a topic of conversation. And one thing as well, maybe to Councillor Page's questions, what we've been seeing a couple times anecdotally is some of the newer housing stock that is located in the downtown, people are buying it to, provide they have a parking stall, buying it to use it as a short-term rental because the cost of the units, you can't rent them to cover the cost of your mortgage, so to speak. So the short-term rental is if you're doing it as an investment. So that's why we're kind of thinking that there might be something that we want to look at in terms of the tourist accommodation, where it is not within a hotel, but it was built as a residential product, and then it's being bought as to be used as a short-term rental. So I think the cost of housing, the mortgage rates and all that is kind of pushing things in that direction as well.
Councillor Page,
So
okay, sorry.
I appreciate that is what's happening on the ground today in the current environment. My question really is as we look at the elements of that decision that leads to the asking price that is asked based on the trends within the market that other people have gone ahead and bought for that price, and so homeowner or owners, building property owners, expect that they can get an X dollar amount. When we make that even easier by providing these allowable uses that allow for that calculation to go on both the buyer and the seller's side of what could be potential for that property, are we shooting ourselves in the foot, per se, because we are allowing the commodification of rental stock that otherwise would diminish the revenue opportunity of that particular building, and on both sides of the buyer and seller decision, lower the opportunity and therefore lower the asking price of those properties. Because I don't think we live in a world where if it wasn't an opportunity, those properties wouldn't still need to go through a natural cycle of being transferred and moved around and sold. That activity still happens within the breadth of society anyway. Are we helping drive and alleviate pressure on the inflationary side of housing costs by allowing these revenue opportunities that are also impacting our residential market, and therefore justifying larger mortgages in and of themselves?
I think, can I just,
I think Councillor Pinheiro is next. Do you need to?
I was going to put that into a one sentence. Because
that is welcomed.
And I think what you're saying is that it's a circular argument, that you have a mortgage helper, and I'm going to actually repeat back to you what you said there, Matt, supplementary income to help pay mortgages. So you're saying a mortgage helper, and this is the common definition. And so I think what Keith is trying to get at is that maybe it's time for us to shift if that's what we need to do. So the circular argument is you've got a mortgage helper, but it helps pay your mortgage. Well, that's the definition of a mortgage helper. So if the mortgages were lower, then we wouldn't need the helper. So if we're building things specifically so that and it inflates the prices.
A little bit more
That's
than
the
one
same.
sentence, and Councillor Pinheiro would now like to add.
Yeah, so those are all good points, and actually, Keith, I like that point. I think in some ways maybe I can have a stab at one sentence, but are we not
You go.
creating the problem by allowing these things? You're allowing people to buy with the expectation that they're going to have this income, and so they're buying at a higher price than they normally would, and so it continues until it's no longer sustainable anymore. Which I feel I have a couple questions about things in that vein. I mean, from what I can tell, both STRs and tourist accommodation, I mean, it's just a zoning difference, right? Both are used by tourists.
Correct.
Right. So there's no difference really. It's in the context of who's using them and who isn't. And who isn't using them is people that live here. And so that's a problem as far as the sustainability of our community, the vibrancy of our community, which is one of the things that we've identified as something we want to improve, right? So this is having a negative effect on that exponentially, I would argue. And then just on the numbers here, like there's 30 entire houses, or just over 30 entire houses that have put up for Airbnb, and just under 50 suites. So, around 80 units completely out of the market. And I'm wondering, those houses, like there is a component, they're supposed to be primarily residential, but what is that number? Like, can I stay in my house can I come and, paint the walls for a week once a year, and that satisfies that residential angle, and then the rest of it's essentially a hotel? I'm not sure about that, but it's a curious question. And then my last point for now, I think, or question is, you spoke about, the capacity sort of vis-a-vis growth and development and these things. And it seems like it's working in those capacities, but we've been at a 0 vacancy rate for some time now. So maybe I'm just wondering how that capacity was calculated, and if we're at 0 capacity, then why, or 0 vacancy, sorry, why do we have any capacity for this? We need housing. So why is there any capacity for short-term rentals at all? It's not maybe I should cut it short there. But the other, lastly, I guess, is that, I'm not that old, and I remember when people used to rent out their suites as mortgage helpers, and that was fine. So, yeah, that's a lot. Sorry, piece that out as you will.
Right.
Thanks.
Yeah, those are all great points. In terms of the principal residency piece, if you are to rent out your home, it does depend on the number of units that are on the property. So say you have a house with a basement suite. Sometimes we'll see a property owner living in a suite and then they rent out the house. And when there's 2 units on the property, that does satisfy that requirement to have a principal resident on the property. And therefore, yes, you could just paint the walls 1 week each year, and that would satisfy the requirements. So, it is dictated by the number of units. And as for the capacity, I'm not totally sure how the actual the number, the 150 cap, the 110 cap for annual licenses was originally decided when these regulations were put in place. But it was surely established based on demand from the public and what was surely followed best practice, I suppose, for short-term rentals in other cities. What would be appropriate based on neighborhood impact and based on the population size and the number of homes that we have. So I believe that's likely how that capacity was established. Whether or not that capacity is existent today, I suppose, is up for debate, I guess.
I think there's one thing to
Oh.
specify too,
Yeah.
sorry, Matt, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we've, at the very least, we've dealt with in residential zones, so people cannot just buy a house as an investment and just short-term rent it. They need to be the primary residents of that place.
Okay.
Technically.
Can I
So,
ask
Councillor
again?
Tamara's gonna
Because
do a
we
supplemental,
do,
then
it
Councillor
does,
Page, and then I have a
yeah,
question.
it does come to us that people are kind of wondering, and that's another big piece to this, since we're talking high level, is that we get people wanting to do STRs every day, and they're like, these regulations are crazy, why are you over-regulating this stuff? People don't get the big picture, right? So, a lot of these conversations have happened when these bylaws were initiated. Unfortunately, both Matt and I were not there at the time. So I'm going to guess, like anything in planning, it was some sort of a balanced approach, right? Came up with a cap, and it probably resonated with what was existing. And then there's also, I think these units are being created as well. They might not be short-term rental forever. They could be something else eventually, but that's where the cap comes into play, right? That was the number that, working with the council at the time, was seen as the reasonable number. If that needs to change, then we just need the direction to change that. So I think it really boils down to that. I think our regs are good. We're on them every day. But then if there is a question around, this is too much, then tell us. And tell us to relook at it, and then we can do that. But we're just right now working with our regs that were adopted by council at the time.
I'm just going to ask a quick question, and I could have looked this up before, I apologize, but the price for a short-term rental license on an annual basis is how much?
Thanks.
It does depend on the type of unit that you'll be renting. For a suite, it would be $1,600 for a year. For a home, it would be $800.
Okay, and for tourist accommodation, I'm interested in the comparison, I guess, is what, are they in the same ballpark? Or is,
A tourist accommodation business license is $160 per year.
So it's just a license.
so if I have a business on Baker Street and I turn that into the top into, it's that 160 is included in my business license for my business plus the short-term rental?
No, you would need a separate business license for that.
Okay,
Yeah.
so obviously, economic incentive to do a short-term rental as opposed to a longer-term lease. Pretty clear economic incentive, is there not there? Okay. Councillor Page?
So I would take the opportunity to refer for review the regulations around downtown housing, tourist accommodation, and whether or not it's appropriate to start considering a cap. I would like to hear back from Development Services staff about that. No referring?
No referring. So we can
It's a
take note
workshop,
of
can
that.
we?
And it is a workshop and it is a CAL meeting, so we're not generally pushing it off to staff at this point.
All right.
I think the purpose of today, and I think Matt did a really good job to talk about what it is and what it isn't, where we're at. If, you can take time to digest that information. If you want to give us a call, send us an email to have a bit more one-on-one, we can do that as well. But ideally, if there are some things that, you can't sleep and you're thinking about it, it could be something to talk about for the 2024 work plan, for us to look at that. Because once we reopen this, it's going to be a big community conversation, right? So I just want to, it needs to go through a process, right? Because they're big questions. There's a lot of people involved. If we're starting to cancel business licenses and stuff like that, there's going to be some, there's going to be some bits and pieces that we need to figure out. There's a communication piece to all of this and a greater engagement. So, I guess today is just really information. And then if there's something that you want to think about, that we can look at maybe on next year's work plan, I think that would be something to flag at some point in time.
Okay, so if I can finish up, thank you. I appreciate that. I have no problem putting it in the parking lot we used to have for those conversations. If we can bring that back in the parking lot. I did want to cover a couple things that I heard today that I think are interesting to go look at addressing some of the pressures we're seeing out there in the community. So the capping the downtown tourist accommodations through a change in the business license use makes sense to me to have a good look at and understand the pros and cons of that. The price point makes sense to me. At 2% of our building stock, are these numbers even appropriate? We see within the cannabis component of our business license, we have quite high rates to get compliance under the justification that we need additional safety investments in our public services and our police department in order to maintain those kinds of businesses. these are having an impact on 2% of our housing stock. What is the cost of our activity to remediate that impact? Are these license fees appropriate given the impact they're having on the overall housing stock? Maybe they're not. And is the balance to promote them and make them affordable, or is the balance to have them be effective? So I would like to look at the pricing and understand, is there something we should be doing there further? I think we've been talking about looking at that, but that component of the MRDT, like, is that something we're getting ready to ask for? Are we looking for when we're funding the other side of this equation, the affordable component? And then I know both directly and anecdotally that the residential primary compliance piece might not be is not as effective as maybe we think it is. There are certainly cases of within 100, it might be only 2, 3, 4%. It might be higher. But how beyond host compliance are we ensuring that the residential primary component is actually being used and not someone having one room in a building that they might come to once in a while when they visit Nelson, and the rest of the time, the rest of the house is all Airbnb, which is that really what we're looking for when we're talking about residential primary compliance? I assume we expect it to be someone who lives there primarily and also rents it out. But is it maybe, are people finding ways around that? And should we look closer at, especially these single unit housing situations, and say, how can we better understand if this is actually your primary residence in this country?
Filling up the parking lot. Anything else for the parking lot?
Well, I just wanted to
Yep, nope.
describe what was in the
Got
parking
it there.
lot. So,
Was that a clear communication? Is there,
Yeah, just supplementally, I think that's a great point about, the sort of, I wouldn't say the roadblocks, but the hoops that we make, a cannabis store jump through because of the perceived knock-on effects of that business license, right? There's police and there's all of these things that we perceive is going to be increased by the existence of that entity. And the non-existence of housing in this community, I would argue, you want to talk policing, you want to talk emergency services, you want to talk mental health, you want to talk addictions, like the knock-on effects of not having a place to live blows a cannabis store out of the water. And I think we need to look at it with that context, is that it's an emergency and that these licenses are, I don't want to demonize people that have Airbnbs. It's clearly not their intent, is to cause homelessness and addiction. That's not why they're doing it. However, the realities are what they are, and I think council needs to take that into account, as our position is we have this sober sort of overview of what's going on, and we're not locked into a mortgage that we can't afford, and we're not struggling to make ends meet in the same way. It's not immediate for us. We have the luxury of seeing the big picture, and that, unfortunately, to me, is the big picture. That these STRs and this tourist accommodation is directly causing a lot of the other social problems and lack of cohesion in the community. So I would just like us to give it that gravity. It's not as simple as, keeping up with growth or, this capacity, that capacity. I think it's actually a very serious issue, and has knock-on effects. And while, anecdotally, I can say that there's a lot of empty houses in this community that are used as Airbnbs and nobody ever lives there. I know quite a few of them. So whether that's enforcement or a change of the rules, and these are the rules as they exist, and we may be doing a great job of enforcing the rules as they exist, but I think maybe we need to change the rules if that's because it's persistent. It's not getting better, it's getting worse. Anyway, I would give it the same lens, right? If we're looking at we're not just looking at the thing, we're looking at the things that thing causes, and the lack of a place to live certainly causes a fair amount of things.
yeah, it's a big piece in a complex puzzle.
My last comment is, last summer I went with my family to Canmore, And I have never, I mean, just in relationship to how controlled it is here, I mean, it blew me away in Canmore. I mean, they're building whole new, brand new, 50 unit structures that are specifically designed for people to invest in short-term rental. They're purchasing a unit that goes into a pool. They never live there. It's just a place to park money and make money. I felt like a totally naive, country bumpkin person coming there and seeing this. I had no idea that it was on that scale, and there were huge parts of that town which are just that, row upon row upon row of 50 unit structures. Now it's a completely different world. It's servicing Calgary and lots of big populations, but we're a long way from that, and I do feel like we do have to also factor into the knock-on effects that we are a tourist town that doesn't have a lot of homegrown or big industry like Castlegar has their industry and Tekis and Trail. So we don't have a lot of that. So there has to be this incredible variety in our town to make it. So I think there is a balance in everything, and we just have to consider that people are trying to make it here, and this is one way that they add to their income, and also service our quite large tourist population. So I'm not trying to totally get what you're saying, and there's definitely knockoff effects that are causing negative problems, but we also have to consider that there's the other sides to it too. So, thank you.
Awesome. Okay, well, I think we've given
Yeah.
development services lots to think about. And as you said, Sebastian, if anyone has any burning questions that come up later, they're always available to assist us with that. When Councillor Woodward was talking about that, am I the only person in the room who knows what a timeshare is? Because that's what I was thinking about. Is that what they're doing in Canmore? Or have they just rebranded that? Because
Well, in some communities, they actually just say that you're not allowed to Airbnb or short-term rental anything other than a room in a building, right? You don't get to do units. You get to do
Okay.
rooms.
thank you.
Thank
Thanks for coming. Thanks for the
you.
presentation. Thanks for the information and just always being there when we need you.
Thank you.
Next. Where are we going next? Oh, I understand that even though the city manager officially is not here, there may be reports coming from Chief Financial Officer, and I still can't say your full title altogether. Chris.
GM.
GM, okay, General Manager.
Nothing specific from the CAO at this time, but I did have some things if Mr. Cormack was here, I was going to add, so I'll just go with what I had. Couple of things. One, we talked last time about UMO, which I don't know what this stands for. U-Mobile, something like that.
Transit app?
Yeah. We will be having those BC Transit come, I think in September, to do a little presentation, and I did get an update from them that UMO, the target date for rolling that out in West Kootenays will be in January of 2024. So just a little update of when we might see that, and that's still a bit tentative, but that's kind of where we're at. They're doing a staged approach across the province in different areas first, and that's kind of where we're slotted in to get that product. Another piece is we have a retirement in Public Works that's happening, one of our arborists. And so in order to ensure that we're kind of pulling on that information that, has been accumulated over the years, we will need to bring somebody in to ahead of that retirement, which means for a period of a few months here, we'll have kind of a doubling up of that resource. The Public Works budget's tight, so we talked about this during our budgeting process. We didn't add any, there's no fat on the budget. We kept things pretty lean. So in doing that, it does put some pressure on the Public Works operating budget, and I'm hopeful that we can accommodate that within the budget, but there's potential that as we get to the end of the year, as things come up and we do that financial plan amendment, we may need to add in a piece. I'm guessing, $30,000 to $40,000 to kind of cover up that doubling up of that resource. Then I would bring that to you later on in the year, but I think it's something we should and need to do in order to kind of keep that consistency and have succession planning and just part of business and letting folks kind of move on with their lives and also being able to have business continuity. So that's kind of where we're at. If you see something get posted out there, we're not adding a permanent extra resource, we're just bringing something in early to kind of cover that up until that retirement happens.
And
Yeah.
if I may just add to that, maybe a little bit of additional detail. So all of our employees in Public Works, after a career here, they have a whole bunch of information that they can pass down, which is what we're intending to do here. This one particular person, this idea of bringing someone in to train under the other person for an amount of time isn't necessarily in every position thing that we do, though. This one is very unique. This person has some knowledge that only they carry. So while we're hoping to bring someone in to be able to get a lot of that information passed down, or however that those sort of chips fall, maybe someone bumps up and then we bring someone to fill that in. At the same time, I can tell you that our director of municipal operations is also paying attention to learning a few of the tricks that this person has learned over their 20-year career. So just wanted to make the point that this isn't something that we do with every retirement at Public Works or in positions. It's just sometimes you come about certain individuals that have a skill set unto themselves, and that needs to be passed on to someone.
Yeah, that's all that I had. I don't know if, Chris, you had anything in addition you wanted to? Oh, okay.
Generational knowledge, very important to pass down, especially as things are changing around us. Okay, what's next? Council reports. What do we got? Councillor Woodward.
Well, along with Councillor Payne, we both were at the Sinaiacs canoe launch.
Canoe journey.
Or canoe journey.
Nelson
Part of it.
stop.
They've
Yep.
it's been 7 days.
Journeying from Revelstoke.
From Revelstoke. And so they were launching at the end of the airport to go across and look at the hieroglyphs.
The pictographs.
The pictographs on the wall there. Sorry, not pictographs. And it was this wonderful experience. There must have been, I don't know, over 100 people there. It was pouring rain, but people showed up and they had the big dugout canoes and yeah, I just felt like it was a real community event and community celebration. And there was a lot of good feelings and laughs, and trying to manage the weather was pretty hectic. And then it calmed down just before all the canoes went out, so that was really positive. But yeah, that was a really good kind of heartwarming community experience that I went to.
Awesome, thank you.
Yep.
Anybody else? What have you folks been up to?
Okay, I'll give a few of my updates. So we had the regional district board meeting last Thursday. Amongst the normal stuff, the RDCK has put forward a motion that it'll be lifting the water services moratorium in 2024 with the expectation that policies and bylaws and basically any of the bureaucracy that we might want to have in place to then consider water systems being brought into the RDCK will be presented before that date. So that was one thing that had gone through. We had accepted a number of normal run-of-the-mill contracts, and basically it was a pretty run-of-the-mill meeting, other than that, because that's been floating around for a while.
Business was done.
Otherwise, I would leave it maybe to some of the others that were able to attend, but Development Services did an excellent tour of the new building construction that's going on around town. Many on council and around this table were able to jump on a bike and participate in that and get a hands-on understanding of what built structures are coming into the community. We also had Greater Nelson and area elected officials presentation on the greater housing entity that we received a report from a number of months, I guess a couple months ago now, from Macola, and got a little bit more in depth into what we see in terms of opportunities to do or not do that kind of entity. Some of us were there, not everyone had an opportunity to get there, but I know the economic development table, which I might leave to Kate, also touched on that. So I think those are the biggest things coming out of the last 2 weeks.
Can I just add to that, that I thought was really great with the housing workshop was the regional aspect. Because there was us counselors around the table, but there was also lots of directors, area directors and staff and
The mayor of Castlegar.
the mayor of Castlegar.
Didn't we have Nicusp and?
Mayor of Caslow.
Mayor of Caslow, Cusp.
So there was really
Was-
kind of that.
You
Came
had
in.
areas directors. Yeah. RDCK was invited.
Yeah. So it was nice to see that kind of regional approach rather than just in the city. So,
Makes us stronger all around.
yeah.
Anything else? Councillor Tate? No?
What am I forgetting about rec commission? You go ahead. No. It was pretty, yeah, rec commission was run of the mill. We didn't, nothing comes to mind.
Okay, well, we're coming in just about right on time for dinner, so I'll make mine really quick. It has been an extremely busy couple of weeks out there. In addition to the Cenax stop here on their canoe journey, which, as Councillor Woodward said, it was an amazing experience to be out on the water with those boats, those, yeah, you can't say canoe, it just doesn't sound right, but there was a flotilla that accompanied them across, and it was a very different experience than just going across and seeing it on your own. And then they after cooking salmon in pits down at Lakeside Park in the sand, they took that up, and there was a full community lunch that was well attended, with lots of opportunities for learning, understanding, listening to panels. Brittany Anderson was there to speak on a panel, and the mayor also presented at a panel. So I think a really incredible opportunity for our community just to learn more about where we live, what our place is, and the belongingness of all peoples that are here. The weekend before that, also a huge event. I know it was Cavalcade, but I went to the Columbia Basin Trust Symposia, which was in Trail, and we probably could have loaded up a bus from Nelson to go there. So Nelson was well represented in all areas, arts and culture, business, and Columbia Basin Trust, as usual, does an excellent job of community engagement. There were lots of opportunities to add to what the direction could be, and I think one of the most interesting things for me was they asked whether, going forward, they should focus on one big area or continue to be involved in a variety of sectors around the basin. So that generated a lot of conversation. They didn't suggest what that area was. Different tables came up with things like housing, transportation, climate, all of the culture, all of those sorts of things. But it was interesting how they're looking at possibly doing a shift from the way they've traditionally done business. I'll just add one more thing, and just a small thing, but the Cultural Development Committee juries the art that hangs in City Hall, and my understanding is that it was switched today.
It's in
It's in progress. So these are local artists who have the opportunity for the next year to have their work being shown here. You might not traditionally think of City Hall as an art gallery, but it is a wonderful opportunity to come and support local artists, and that sort of leads into Friday night when we'll have the opportunity for two incredible events. I don't know how people can ever say that there's nothing to do in Nelson, because Art Walk is Friday night. It is spreading, it is going deeper, it is going broader. There's something for everyone, all ages. And then I'm going to say this incorrectly, so I won't say the name, but the Civic with Leslie Garlow, who's Indigenous Education over at the Nelson Museum, and I probably have her title incorrect, have curated an amazing film festival this weekend of what the progression of how Indigenous artists and themes show up in film and have done for quite some time. So there's some spectacular films coming to our small town, which just always sort of blows me away. Did a few other things, but probably talk about them later. And time for us to break for lunch. Do we adjourn from this, or we just? We do a temporary recess.
Temporary adjournment.
A temporary adjournment, and we are seconded, and is anybody gonna oppose that one, or should we just go for it? We're good. Thanks. Come back. We'll be here.
We didn't do anything.
It was before the last meeting.
Was it? Wasn't there something more recently than that?
We had one on the 6th. Well, we had a council on the 6th, then we had a meeting on like the 1st.
Oh, I know why it's on the top.
Just put Sydney. Just put Sydney Black in charge of it. Just like a little like.
No, we could have like a musician royale.
Battle of the bands.
It's not what I am. But also, so many options. So many.
Shoot. I gotta get these off my desk. That'll confuse me. That was the last one. We're done with that. Where? So I only have the one page for this now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's so much easier.
She's gone. Hi, Monica, can you hear me?
He's speaking. She must be on mute. Can you see? You can see her.
Okay, I can't hear you, but I can see you.
We'll get in there. Yeah, we don't this time.
Monica, can you just say hello so I can tell you if I can hear
Hi
you?
there, can you hear me again? I've unmuted myself.
Okay, we can hear you now.
Awesome.
He'll be presenting.
Well, hello, everyone. This is so exciting. Welcome to Council Chambers at City of Nelson. I'm going to ask for a motion to reconvene our Committee of the Whole meeting from June 20th, 2023, which we started at 4:30, took a break for dinner, and now we're back. And so happy that you all, motion from Councillor Woodward, second. Do we need a second on the
Second.
reconvene? And Councillor Page, and all in favor. And we are back. Again, thank you so much for coming. I'm so glad you could make it here tonight. It's always delightful to look out and see a full crowd in the audience, as well as those residents and visitors who are joining us online or who want to watch the meeting later. We have a couple of items that are of great interest, obviously, to members of the audience, and we'll look forward to hearing from you as we also need to adopt the agenda.
We would have adopted it before.
We've already adopted the agenda. Okay, we did that before. This is as you can see, this is my debut in this chair. I'm not the mayor, just for everyone watching out there. Our mayor currently is, I believe, in Victoria on city business and not joining us online, but probably listening at some point in time. So the first order of business at a committee of the whole meeting,
Hey, pardon,
we're not, oh, yes, Councillor Page?
microphone? Do you want, maybe
Is it
pull it up?
not?
Yeah, I don't think it's catching the speakers. So maybe if you could,
I can't get it any closer.
And we can't make it any louder. Sorry.
I will, how about if I just enunciate more clearly? I actually feel like standing up, because generally in any sort of presentation or meeting, but I won't, because this is my job and this is my directions. So the first part of our meeting tonight, our continuing meeting, is, wrong agenda, public participation. So I do have a sheet here that I need to read out to clarify the public participation at the committee of the whole meeting of council. Public participation period is limited to 15 minutes in total. A speaker may only address council once for a maximum of 3 minutes, unless authorized otherwise by unanimous vote of council members present. Speakers must restrict their remarks to items that are listed on the meeting agenda. Speakers must not address council regarding a matter for which a public hearing must be held or has been held prior to council's consideration of the matter or adoption of a bylaw. Speakers must not address council regarding a permit for which public notice must be given or has been given prior to council's consideration of issuance of the permit. Speakers shall address all comments through the mayor or presiding member, in my case, presiding member. When you come to the microphone, if you could just give us your name and your residence, whereabouts you live, and then we will start the timer for 3 minutes. Anxious to hear. How many people in the audience do we have for a public comment? So 1, 2, 3. So should I start on my left with the gentleman right there? Can you come forward to the mic? Do we know if the mic is on?
He'll have
right
to
here in
press-
these 2 chairs.
And just your name and residence.
Thank you. My name is Wayne. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Can I ask you where you live, Wayne?
I live in Nelson.
Perfect, thank you. Last
Hi.
name, we need it for, just for the minutes.
Perry.
Perry, Wayne
Don't start
Perry.
the timer until I start my speech.
Okay.
I'll try and get through this. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I truly wish I did not feel so obligated to be here, but I cannot let this happen without speaking out. I would have been here months ago if I had known. I am here because for the first time in 30-plus years, no residential street flushing is being done this year. In my opinion, possibly the largest unannounced service cut I've seen in my years in Nelson. Nelson streets require large amounts of sand to keep them safe in winter, essential service. It follows that cleaning it up in the spring is also essential. Spring cleanup involves street sweeping, still lots to do. And more importantly, flushing. Street sweepers at their best do not pick up fine particles, dust. No amount of rain will clean flatter or deteriorated asphalt streets. They must be flushed to get the fine particles off them. I was involved in cleanup, sweeping and flushing for many years and am very much aware of the challenges involved. The flush truck moves through town using various fire hydrants to flush the streets. Aside from cleaning the fine particles up, it also flushes the system to some extent. If you've ever seen the inside of some of our water lines, you'd think that was a good idea. Water is still flowing over the dam at 5 Mile Creek intake. Although the city has grown over the last number of years, we still have the water to clean our streets if it is done during the freshet. Bus routes are the worst. I got behind a city bus last week after the rainstorm. Everywhere the bus goes, it produces a cloud of dust. Some streets had huge amounts of dust whipped up. Happens every time the bus passes. Sweepers cannot clean up these fine particles even with multiple passes. The flush truck creates curtain of water in front of it and floats the fine particles off the street. It is the only way to get the fines off the street. Council prides itself on green ideas, bicycle routes, etc. I would like to think a clean city would be very high on your agenda. Anybody with breathing difficulties is not going to like the huge amounts of dust left on the streets this year. I implore you to look into this very important issue and to work with city staff, and for the health and well-being of the people in Nelson, please get our streets cleaned. Annual cleanup should have been done by now. Summer starts tomorrow. Many streets are still covered in sand. In the last 20 days, sweepers were used 3 days. Unless you have any questions, I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Wayne, for coming to present to us. It sounds like you have a lot of expertise in this area, and Councillor Page has a question for you. Are you good to stay at the mic so Councillor Page can ask a question?
I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
Councillor Page is ready to ask a question.
Yep.
So, through the chair, Wayne, have you been able to give this in writing to any city staff?
I had a conversation with the person I believe who originated this plan. I had a conversation with his supervisor in City Hall. I had a conversation with the mayor a week ago. Yes, I have looked into it. I was told they had flushed the primary, which is a downtown area, okay? If you go up Ward Street right now, the primary, I believe, starts below Silica Street.
Okay.
Go have a look at one block above that on Ward Street, outside of that church. It hasn't been swept all year. There's gravel that thick there. There's many places in town that's still there. And I'm here to talk about the flushing, because it's the stuff you can't see that's going to be whipped up into the air. Same thing's going to happen here. I clean my block where I live. After this rainstorm, I'll go out there with my blower next week and I'll blow an incredible amount of sand off that street that I have cleaned several times already this year, because that's how fast it migrates through town. When it rains like this, everything turns into a big slurry.
Yep.
Anything that was clean before is not going to be when it dries up. The buses, yes, they'll beat it off to the side. It'll rain again, it comes back out, buses are going to beat it off. We'll be in that stuff all summer, in my opinion, so.
Okay, thanks, Wayne.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so the next public comment was in the middle at the back.
Come on down.
Sorry, come on down. And again, just your full name and where you live.
And Dorothy Ann Mackey on the 500 block Silica, and I was unclear from your beginning whether I'm even allowed to say any of this.
You
but
are
it's-
allowed to say,
yeah.
this is public comment.
Well,
It
this
is a little,
Well, I mean, I'm behind the new build, the big black thing on our alley hasn't exactly, we've been putting up with that for 2 years, but parking has been a problem for years. Even before that, it's not possible for the bylaw control officers to patrol our street properly. People often park all day, certainly for many hours at a time. One side of the street's not available at all. The church has 3 spots at the end. There's only 8 spots total. Our street alone has 4 parking permits, and people from the other streets also use our street. This was when it was residents only. They use this space. When the new building is full, there's only 22 spots for 47 units. It will be a nightmare for the permit holders on our block to park. It's already a problem because it's gone from residents only back to 2 hours. It can't be patrolled. The bylaw control officers cannot patrol that properly. People park all day. We've sent lists of violators, nothing gets done, and we just get treated like we're just being jerks and complaining all the time. But, people should be able to, I'm a senior, my tenant has equipment and a daughter and groceries. You shouldn't have to park 3 blocks away from your own house, because it's just this one street that's worse than any other street. And I just ask that our one street be returned to residents only, so the homeowners and their tenants should be able to park here. In the 2 years it's been residents only, it allowed permit holders to park near their homes. I think it needs to be returned to this. I've polled my entire street, including my own. I've had 8 responses. I sent that package in. I've been speaking on this for at least 6 months, and I was told to my face that there was no plans to turn it back to 2 hour. And now that it's 2 hours, of course, it's full all the time. And as that building fills up, there's no parking. I mean, just permit holders at least. I mean, I don't know, I've asked for meters, but it's residential, can't have those. I've asked them to paint lines, because if people don't park properly, there's only 7 spots on the whole block. There could be 9 if the lines were painted, and I'm just asking, because there isn't enough bylaw, there isn't any way to control that effectively, and it worked well, better when it was residents only, as at least the officer could go up and immediately see whether a permit holder had a spot or not, because it's full all day long. I've personally taken 5, 6, 7, all day people park there, and so the people that live there can't park, and I just don't think that's fair, you know, especially since we've been dealing with that nightmare of a build for 2 years, and now we can't park on our street still. Anyways, I'm just really hoping it can go back to residents only, just that one 500 block of Silica, because people from all around, permit holders from all the blocks around use it as well. That's
Thank
just
you.
my wish.
Thank you very much. You can have a seat for a second, just in case there are any questions. Really want to appreciate you coming forward. I do know that every time I hear this read, it sounds like it's a more limiting space. But it's so important for all citizens to feel that they can come and utilize this time for especially issues like the one you're discussing. That's how we get the information, that's how we can make those choices, and parking is always something that's top of mind at
Oh, I know,
council.
'cause it's right downtown. And it would
Yeah,
be
are there
different if
any-
people honored it and stayed there 2 hours and left, but that isn't what happens.
Yeah, so we
No, it's
do
just
really
not.
appreciate your input. I know you've done a lot of work in working with your neighbors, so thank you. Are there questions from any other councillors? We have heard you. Thank
And I'm
you.
just wondering, would I be able to expect some kind of timeline to hear back on that?
That I am not sure of, but we now have the information.
Yeah. Hi, I think what would be best is if you put something in writing,
It's been in writing.
okay?
Yeah.
You might need to do it again now that you've been to public participation. I'm not sure if you, how you sent it or.
Sebastian.
Okay,
I sent
so-
the package to Sebastian.
Okay, that's fine. We can follow up with Sebastian, and we will, I don't know what the timeline looks like right now, but staff we're definitely aware of it, and we'll,
But I'm just wondering, I mean, I'm just trying to be practical. A month, 6 months? I mean, is,
Yeah, we'll be able to get back in touch with you with a timeline once we're able to talk to Sebastian and have a look at the email. And
Okay.
then we can let you know, and then we'll at least give you a
yeah,
heads
well,
up
just have
of what the
any,
process
just not
is.
be
Yeah.
left hanging, yeah, that'd be
Yeah,
great.
you
Thank you
bet.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. And there was one more. Okay, come on up and take the chairs. Thank you
My
very
name-
much.
My name is Lily Mayall. I live at 231 High Street in Nelson.
Thank you.
My name is Debbie Garretts, and I live in Fairview.
3 minutes. Okay.
Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity. I'm speaking on behalf of NELS, the Nelson End of Life Society, and we've been working on this initiative for 6 years. In fact, we presented to council in 2018, and we didn't hear back, so I'm glad we've got a green council here. I guess the only concern is that you're young and maybe not thought a lot about your packaging and what's going to happen to it when you don't need it anymore. Anyway.
We're not that young.
So 80% of us are getting cremated, and a lot of people don't understand the amount of toxins that are spewed into the atmosphere with that and the fossil fuels that are consumed. So, however, there are people that are becoming informed, and we have a petition with 1,500 signatures on it now, and it's growing every day as people become more aware and would like this choice for our cemetery in Nelson. Thompson's Funeral Home, and they're here with us. They have been kind enough to give us a letter of support because they're getting so many requests for green burials here. And Dumont Cemetery in Winlaw also has given us a letter of support because they're not able to accommodate all the requests that they're getting for people to be buried there. So we need to address this for our own people in our own cemetery. So what is a green burial? So for those of you who aren't aware, the body goes into the ground unembalmed. There's no embalming. It goes in a shroud or a simple box, no plywood or little amount of hardware. And the way it works, it's like if you have an area, it's like painting your way out of a room. So whoever comes next is buried next, and it's like that. So you don't buy an individual plot, you buy an opportunity to be buried in the area. So so that's what we're asking for, is a green burial area where people can make the choice and have the opportunity to be buried in this fashion. After the area is full, it's planted with indigenous trees and shrubs and ground covers, and so it becomes contiguous with the natural surrounding landscape, and it turns into, a beautiful area. Caslow has this opportunity for green burials. Selmo has a working group looking into it. New Denver's opening their standalone cemetery, green burial cemetery in the fall, and we'd like to be able to offer this to our people here. Since we've been working on it so much, we have many resources, contacts, and information, so we can support you, and we'd love to work with you because we have so much information, and a lot of this material is in the handout packets that we gave you. So we'd love to have a point person or somebody that we can connect with as we go forward with this initiative, hopefully.
Just over the 3-minute mark. Nicely done. But I was still hanging on every word, so we'll go to questions. Councillor Pinheiro?
Yeah, oops. So I was just wondering if it might be in here and I'll get to it eventually, but just wondering if if it needs its own space, or can a green burial exist amongst other types of burials? I know in Argenta, where my folks are from, the cemetery there has green burials as well as other types of burials, and it's all in the same cemetery. I don't know if there's plots for one and plots for the other, or just if you want a green burial, you can have one. Is there a reason why it needs a designated spot?
So the reason is that the way that it happens, so if it's an area, say it's this room, and it's going to be green burials. So as I say, people buy the opportunity to be buried there, not an actual plot, so that when that area is full, it's planted with trees and shrubs and ground covers. And I know in Argenta it's pretty beautiful because we visited your cemetery and there are a lot of trees, and it's not manicured the way our cemetery is. The other thing that's required here, which unfortunately doesn't permit green burials in our cemetery, is that a vault cover, it's in the bylaws that a vault cover is required on every single burial. So that precludes a green burial because you've got this fiberglass cover over every grave. So we've been working actually with Penticton. We've got the bylaw so it wouldn't be a green burial in our cemetery because it needs a vault cover. So there's a couple of things that need to be done. We've got the bylaw that they instituted in Penticton, and so we've got a lot of information to help you with it. Sorry I took so long to answer you.
That's great, thanks.
Okay, so I have down Councillor Woodward.
So I was actually along those lines. So the vault cover, I guess, is to keep the material contained when you bury somebody, and that
It keeps the ground from sloughing in.
sloughing in.
Pardon? For the lawn mowers? Yeah, it keeps it because it's all pristine in our
Sure.
cemetery now. So we're looking at, it's mounded up there are many green burials all across Canada now. So this is all addressed, and it's planted with indigenous trees and shrubs and ground covers. So it doesn't have to be perfectly flat. It's not mown or anything like that.
So I guess my question would be around, groundwater runoff, or, does that have to be taken into consideration? What's moving through the ground with green burials?
I have never heard that issue come up.
Okay.
I really don't know anything about it, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Page?
Thank you. I know you presented to council at a previous term, previous to the previous term. Do you have a letter, a request, potentially with people who would like to sign up for a green burial that we can give to staff or that staff can action? A request. Have you formalized your request recently into an updated letter that staff can work from in this term? Do you have the original letter?
So, Councillor Page, you're saying there was a letter at the presentation in 2018?
I believe there's been a request before.
Okay.
My request
Well,
is,
maybe
much like we
we'll-
heard from a few others today, is there something that staff can take away, mull on, and get back to you?
We'd have to redo the letter from 2018. We've got the letters that we've done to the paper.
Okay.
We can then just formulate into a letter to council.
To council and staff, perhaps, and then staff can be, if you could send it to corporate services on the second floor here.
Okay.
If they could get
You're asking what it is we'd actually really like you to do.
the actual ask on a piece of paper.
Yeah, okay.
To staff,
Sure.
to the city, saying, we've got X number of people who'd like to sign up for green burials. How do we service this request?
Yeah. This is the original one from 2018 with Lily's presentation. And it's really just, again, a summary of the presentation without the specific request.
With the ask.
Yeah, with the ask.
Okay, we can easily do that.
Yeah, if you guys could do that and get that to corporate services, which is
Thank
as
you.
easy
So-
as reception@nelson.ca.
Okay, that's it.
Or the reception desk.
So that sounds like our next step.
It
Okay,
is.
so we have one more question.
Here to support green burial?
So we do have one more question. Councillor Lochtenberg is online. So Rick, can you?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. In addition to what was recommended from Councillor Page, I'd like to move a motion to refer to staff to the next council meeting on the feasibility and process for updating the cemetery bylaw to allow for green burials. And I
So-
forwarded that motion to Sarah.
Yeah. Just so that, I think you know this, Councillor Lautenberg, but there are no resolutions to be, or decisions to be made at this, at a committee of the whole meeting. So, which is why a request for something in writing to staff and council would be a great next step.
We've, just a point of clarification, point of order, actually. We can make a motion to refer to staff to and investigate and bring something back, as we've done even in the last committee of the whole. So just a motion to refer to staff to sort of underline what Councillor Page recommended to ensure that staff recognizes that this is a priority of council to bring it back to us at the next meeting.
So we have a motion on the floor then?
Yeah.
So is there a seconder for that motion?
So just a point of clarification here. Are we out of bounds
The procedural bylaw?
of the procedural bylaw by doing this? I just want to make sure that we're not pushing.
I would have to look at the specifics in the procedure bylaw. I'm going to say yes, but according to Councillor Lautenberg, he's in the right and he actually can refer it to staff. So we can do that, and that's fine as well.
He probably can do that because it was already moved in 2018, so you can follow up on that.
This line.
So I do want to say that when we do get a recommendation, whether it's through staff or from council, we generally include it in a strategic plan review. And that's council's opportunity to decide if they want to move something forward or not. If they feel like they would like staff to somehow fit it into a work plan, and then we all figure out how that would happen. So I'm thinking, I know you came in 2018 and presented to council, and at that time, there was not a big enough appetite on the council to move this forward. So it didn't go into staff's work plans. That doesn't mean that won't happen this time. It just means that it takes some time, and that's the process.
Can I ask a question? Did you not just recently have a strategic plan review?
We did.
So when
Not a
you say-
review, but it was a brand new session for a brand new council to sit down and hash out what they would like to see happen and what their priorities are. We tend to do a review every year, and we will do one in the fall, and then we'll do one every fall following until there is another new, until there's another council sitting.
So I guess my question is, does this wait till the next strategic plan review, or can it be pushed forward with an ask and a feasibility study?
Well, Councillor Lautenberg has just put forward a motion to refer it to staff. So I'm still going to ask you to please provide something in writing for us, because I would reach out to you anyway. And it's his prerogative. If this is what he would like to do, if this is the process he would like to follow, then okay.
I'll second that, just to make,
Okay.
just to move it on so
Okay.
that staff can at least have a peek at what
Sure,
this
we would anyway, but
Yeah.
yep, that's totally fine.
Okay.
Are there any questions regarding the motion? So seeing
Mayor,
none.
Looks like Councillor
Rick, did you want to speak to
Sorry,
that?
sorry.
Councillor Lautenberg?
Yep, just to offer, it's a relatively small ask. It's something we did just 2 committees of the whole ago regarding the bird city, declaring Nelson a bird city. So this process in terms of just passing it on to staff, referring it to staff, is something we've done in the recent past. So for something as sort of small, relatively small as this, just asking staff to investigate the feasibility, I think it's within bounds, given what we did 2 months ago.
Councillor Page?
I appreciate that. I had the same instinct as Councillor Lautenberg to refer this to staff. My consideration here about it being a letter first to staff to let them work through the request through the front door is that when it gets to us for a decision, there's going to have to be consideration around how we're organizing the cemetery, where those kinds of considerations are going to go, what the fee schedules are going to be, what the environmental considerations are going to be. I personally would like to see this move forward. I'd like to see it move forward in a thoughtful way, and I think if staff has a letter, they could start that process. I think if we have it at a subsequent business meeting in short order, I think that might end up rushing things a little bit too much, and so I kind of think we'll get there either way. I don't want to speak for the rest of council, but I do think there would probably be a ton of support. So I'm not so inclined. I think I heard in the motion refer to the next business meeting. I think that might be a bit too rushed, but I would prefer to see it as a letter coming through staff and a recommendation at an appropriate time,
Would you
once there's
mind
enough
to-
meat on the bones.
Could we have the motion read again?
All I
Just for
have is
clarity.
motion to refer to staff.
Yeah, so it's not the next
There's
no-
business meeting, so there doesn't seem to be any
Sure.
expediency around it. It does just move it that one step forward
Chris
from
had
the way
something
I
else.
understand it. So we have a motion, we have a second, yet another comment, question?
I think Chris.
Just a
sorry.
clarification on the
Yeah.
motion is all. The motion I made was to refer to staff to report back to the next council meeting simply on the feasibility and process for updating the cemetery bylaw, not to do the work, just to report back on how the work would be undertaken. So I think it's a very small and reasonable ask to just, give us an update on what the process would be to update this bylaw. It might be a simple thing as just passing a simple couple line update to the existing bylaw. From what I tell, it looks like that's what it is, but, I'm just asking for a report back on the process for doing so.
Okay, so the question is on the floor. Call for a vote. All those in favor? So we have 3-4 against.
I'm not against. I'm
No,
for.
you're 4.
Yeah.
I've
Sorry,
got
you want-
1, 2, 3.
Sorry, you want to call that again? Because I didn't
So
call the question.
I called the question.
Okay.
in favor?
Who's in favor?
Okay. Hands up.
So I'm counting 4 in favor and opposed. And the motion is carried. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you very much. We're very happy to work with you. We have the bylaw that Penticton instituted for their green burials. We've got a lot of information, and we'd love to hear back from you soon. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for your community participation, for your support of bringing things forward to council. It's a tremendous opportunity to have your voice heard in your community. Tell your friends. Come again. We're done with that part, I think.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
So that's
Threw the wrong agenda away. We'll just let them clear the room now. We go.
Thank you. See you later. Take care. Thank you. Thank you.
So I will move on now that we have a smaller audience, I'm sorry to say, but I'm thankful for all of those of you who have hung in for whatever reason that may be, and I think I know the reason. Before we move on to the
Put public time at the end.
delegations, I am going to mention that the grade 2 class of St. Joe's School got a jump on the official community planning process by visiting City Hall, having a tour, and sharing with the mayor what they felt were some of the things that should be included in the upcoming official community plan. Is that available to be seen on camera? Oh, okay, perfect. So this is the level of engagement we're looking for. We want everybody from,
That's an ask.
here, being able to visualize their thoughts on what our city will look like going forward. To those who are new, those who have been here for a long, long time, this is an important moment in our city's formation. So make sure to follow the amazing engagement that you'll see coming out of the official community plan team. You want to add to that, Councillor Page?
That was beautifully said, and I just wanted, because, when you can deliver on some of the asks for the community, I just want to remind everybody and let them know that Gyro Pool will be open this year. We will all be staffing it.
So check.
So check one.
Check one.
One of 4.
Nailed it.
On to mini putt.
Maybe we'll be mini putting around the pool. Okay, so now I would like to ask the first delegation, the Nelson Lions Club, to come forward.
Everyone was thinking we were about to get a whole bunch of new recruits. Feels only a little bit personal.
We feel that way too.
I hear ya. Was it something I said?
Just for the record, we are a very pro bowling alley.
Can't wait for you to build one.
Back in the day.
So I assume you're more familiar with your role at that table than I am at this table. So introduce yourselves, tell us why you're here. Is that basically how it goes?
That's basically how it goes. So
Okay.
I am, my name's Roger Lay.
Neil Ferguson.
Neil Ferguson. We are both members of the Nelson Lions Club here in Nelson. And we realized the club has never officially presented to the city. I know you're all aware of us because I've seen you all on July 1st. But we thought we would just come in and just tell you a little bit about the club. We don't have an ask this time, but we've just got a little presentation we want to go through. That's about it.
Just that we are a nonprofit, so there will be asks.
There will be asks.
Now, do I have to run this?
Yeah, so just press the arrow and it should go, wait a second.
Like so? Yeah. Great. So the club was established in 1945. So like a lot of the service clubs of the world, they started after the war when people came back and realized the importance of volunteering, and serving community, and just finding personal ways to help your community. So of course in a town the size of Nelson, our service groups are very important, all of our volunteers. So we've been around a long time. We are men and women. There's a picture here of some of our most recent executive. Leslie Payne is our president at the moment. The Lions is an international club with over 1.4 million members in over 200 countries, 46,000 clubs. It started out of Illinois, but we're now all over the place. Pretty exciting. Our job is basically to raise money in our community and then give the money away, which is pretty rad. We're kind of like he and she Robin Hoods, clubs of Robin Hoods. Each club is asked to figure out how will they make money in their own community. Different communities have different abilities to raise money in different ways. So a big part of our club is coming up with new ways to make money, to raise money so that we can disperse it back out.
Lions is pretty cool because the entire organization is built around just doing good stuff for the people in your community. That's it, as Roger said. So our only prerogative is just finding holes that need patched and patching the holes, basically.
That's right. To serve is the Lions motto. Pretty simple. You all know about our July 1st pancake breakfast, which is once again going to happen this year on Baker Street. Chance to dust off, yes, thank you. The chance to dust off the chuck wagon and get up and serve some pancakes. If any of you drop by, you are more than welcome to do a shift. We've had some of you up in previous years, and it's super fun. And it feels, I mean, it's such a day when the community comes out and just has a great time. So that starts early in the morning before we all head down to Lakeside Park. Last year we raised $6,300 that day just by selling pancakes and sausages. Pretty good fun. We have an annual firewood sale every fall. So Kolesnikov has always generously donated scrap lumber, old logs that they can't use. We chop them up. I actually joined the club because it was an excuse to use a chainsaw, not something I get to do in my regular day. So we chop and buck all the logs, sell them locally, and last year again we raised $6,800 that way. So thanks for all of you who've bought wood in the past. We do a Christmas tree pickup, and the city generously often lets us take them to the transfer station for free to be ground up. So it's just a great way to get the Christmas trees back off the street. We raised over $2,000 last year by doing that around town.
And last year it was nuts. Like, it went all day and we still couldn't get all of them. So it's definitely something this year I think there's a huge community need for. More than anything else, we've seen a lot of people who are really, and some people were putting like 50s in their trees to get rid of them. They were really stoked. So that should go well next year.
Yeah. Thank you. And we also have a community grants program. This is our most fun program. We have a legacy fund over at Osprey, and the interest brings us about $15,000 a year, which we then put out to other community charities. Can request this, so the Capitol Theatre, the Civic Theatre, my old friends, different groups around town can apply for community grants, and then we just get to hand out the money and watch them do great things. We do a highway cleanup. We have a patch of highway just outside Blaylock that we look after. Just did that a few weeks ago. My daughter was an expert picker-upper. It's fantastic. We have our Lions Park Garden down at Lakeside Park. A few other projects that we've got going on in the presentation you guys have seen. We support kids sport, the International Foundation, Lions Camp at Winfield, and a few others. And as you can see, we're at about a $32,000 budget. So that's money we raise. We're all volunteers. We pay a membership fee every year. We have to buy our vests usually. So
buy everything.
All the money that comes into the club leaves the club back out to the local community. Here's a couple more of the clubs we do. You all know Lions Park, of course, and we recently partnered with Co-op Radio for their annual fundraiser. I know I saw some of you there. It was a super fun day. I mean, face painting and all sorts of stuff. It was a great day. We do the ice rink up at Lions Park, and the club always goes up and sets up the rink and then takes down the rink, and we have a separate group of volunteers that are maintaining the rink. And I've been told that standing out there at 2 a.m. with a fire hose is pretty much one of the funnest things you can do in the winter, if anybody's interested. We've kind of whipped through this. Last but not least, we are looking at doing a Lions Park playground upgrade. As you know, that playground's showing its age. It's been around quite a while. So we are putting together a plan right now to raise money and replace the playground equipment sometime next year. So we're going to be doing, most of our fundraising this year is going to be going towards this playground. We will at some point like to come back here, and we know the city's in support of this. We've already talked to some of the city staff, thank you. But we may come back looking for letters of support and so on just to help us on the fundraising plan. We are lucky that, of course, because it's a park, community, and kid-oriented, there's plenty of grants. So we know most of the money, we're expecting most of the money is going to come from grants, but we will do a local fundraiser as well. And a big part of it, like any good community fundraiser, is just getting the fun and the energy up of the community and beginning to support the park and have a bit of fun there.
Yeah, and having people step up and help too, because once it comes time to install and take down and all that kind of stuff, there'll be a lot of opportunities for people to kind of come forward who might not have time otherwise, but or maybe politicians who like recently got elected and want to like come and roll up their sleeves and take pictures.
That's right. That's it.
Suggestions.
Suggestions. Very subtle. That's it. It was a quick presentation. We wanted to just give you an idea. We are super proud to be here. We thank you for all the support that we always get from the city and the projects that we do. And we'll look forward to seeing you on July 1st.
And you can volunteer if you want. There's no limit to how many members we have. So if you want more things to do in your community.
That's right. And a little anecdote. A couple of years ago, we got down to about 8 members. There's always been a joke with service groups that the average age is 96. For a while, that wasn't far off. We had a lot of seniors in our club, bless them, who've been members of the club for years and years and years. So we put an article in the paper asking for other volunteers, and we're now up about 35 members, I believe. So it's still a growing club. We're one of the few growing clubs in Canada, which we're excited about. And again, yes, we're always looking for more members, because with more hands, we can do more stuff. We can raise more money, we can give more money away, and we can do more great things. So, thank you.
I believe
Any
Councillor
questions?
Pinero has a question.
Sure.
Okay. Is there when you donate money, or is there does it have to be like an association that asks? Do you give it to individuals? To, like, when you're dealing with sports, is it sports associations or individual teams, or is there any sort of parameters for that, or is it just kind of whoever needs it?
So both. So the community grants program is open to charities and sports groups. So anyone that CRA recognizes as a community charity can apply to our community grants. We also accept letters from community members who are looking for financial assistance. So especially around seniors with eyeglasses and hearing aids and stuff like that. So we often get requests from just community members, and if we can help them, we will.
We did a grab bar, I think, earlier this year, didn't we? Beginning of the
Yeah,
year?
that's right.
We had paid for and installed a grab bar in someone's residence.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
In their bathtub.
Yeah.
I think people often underestimate, like, I'm from a really small community from Canmore originally. I think people really underestimate how much of the community is held together by these small groups. That's why I'm the youngest member. We think. There might be one person younger than me, but I'm 32. Like, and so that tells you something in terms of, like, I bring the bell really far down. But I think a lot of people don't realize the importance of these small pieces, and without them, a lot of people, like this senior we helped out, like, they wouldn't be able to bathe very safely in their own home, right? And if they're not in their own home, there's a huge ripple effect in the community in terms of hospital beds, care aids, all that kind of stuff, right? So, like Roger was saying, we do offer larger grants for things, but the whole point of Lions is to try and help in those small areas. And while $32,000 a year is not a huge amount, it actually goes a long way when you're buying $200 grab bars. You know what I mean? You can help a lot of people with that, and there's no real other avenue necessarily for that kind of thing to exist.
So Councillor Page had a question next.
Yeah, so the concept that you have going here, that's a bit of a facetious question, but for the Lions Park playset, will it be taller than Castlegar's?
No.
If I have my way. So we're going to we'll be talking to staff and finding out what our limits are, but I would love to see a tower go in there. One of the issues is the underlay. So we've got the wood chips, and so if we can raise enough money and get the thicker rubber mat compound, then you're allowed to go a little bit higher for safety reasons. I know the city prefers the wood chips because we've got so much of them, but that's part of our fund. And we welcome input into the design, and we will be putting together a committee. So anyone's welcome to join and be part of that. And part of this project, again, the reason you volunteer is to do stuff you can't do in your regular life. I got to look through the catalogs of companies that make playgrounds, and man, that's fun. So I'm hoping we can do one of those good modern roundabouts that don't break legs and,
But still make you throw up.
Yeah,
that's the important part of the centrifugal force thing, right? Yeah.
Right. After the pancakes.
Of course, yeah.
Councillor Woodward?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I was just wondering how you choose as a group what to do. Like, is it a group decision?
It's absolutely a group decision. Okay. So it comes down to somebody having a good idea and then enough people in the club supporting it. Like any group, of course, we Robert's rules and have to agree on what to do. But that's part of the fun of the club. The more diverse our club is, the more interesting the ideas are. So the projects we mentioned are ones we've been doing for quite a while. They're very successful, well established. But as our club number has grown, we're now looking at all sorts of new ideas of raising money. So it's absolutely up to the club and volunteers. We also have friends of the Lions. Some people want to help, but can't make meetings or for whatever reason don't officially want to join. So we also have friends of Lions, people who are just involved in the club enough to share ideas and help out. At the end of the day, it comes down to people able to do the work. So again, the more hands we have, the more fun we can have, more money we can raise.
A supplemental? Do people come to you and say, hey, we need this?
Yeah.
And then you guys decide as a group?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have an executive meeting and a separate all clubs meeting. So depending on the ask, the size of it, and if they're in our catchment area and so on, it comes out to the club, and depending on the size of the ask, sometimes the executive will make the decision and sometimes it comes out to the club as a whole to decide. Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Are there any other questions? I am very, very grateful that you came to see us tonight and we got to hear about all the incredible things you're doing in our community.
Thank you.
I agree with you, 120% that volunteers are really what makes, one of the aspects that makes Nelson such a unique, special place. We couldn't do it without the legions of volunteers that we have. And it's something that there's been some challenges around that intergenerational transfer of the ability, desire, and even knowledge of what you can do as a volunteer. But there is something for everyone, as I think you've demonstrated to us here tonight. So thanks so much. And for future projects that you're thinking about, keep us in the loop. I'm going to take you up on that offer. I would love to come down. And do I actually get to flip pancakes or just need to serve them?
We'll even give you an apron.
I'll be there, sign me up.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Time to start.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah. If you need new ideas, there's 4 of them.
Okay, and our second delegation of the evening is the Community Wildfire Resiliency Plan. And it looks like Chief Hebert is here with some friends.
And
I think we have somebody.
So is this where we do the public service announcement about tomorrow night?
Be a good spot. Hey.
Okay.
Are we allowed to take advantage of that?
Well, we have a few minutes. I'm going for it. So tomorrow night, I went last year. It was down at the Prestige last year, was it not?
Correct.
A similar event. The interesting thing is, as we look around this year, last year, previous years, it takes a community entirely, engaged and focused on protecting us from what is, in our area, one of the biggest threats I think we will face. So if you want to get more information on how you can do that, bring your friends, bring your neighbors, come on down to the Adventure Hotel tomorrow night between 5 and 8. Do you guys have food?
There are snacks.
There will be snacks. And we'll hear a little bit more, I'm presuming right now, why we all need to come down and just understand better how we can all be part of that solution.
Thank you for the shameless plug.
Anytime.
All the opportunity we can get. Yeah, Adventure Hotel tomorrow for the Nelson area wildfire risk reduction. It's a collaboration between a lot of hardworking people that are working behind the scenes to make sure that Nelson is more resilient in the event of a wildfire. So yeah, come down tomorrow and
I'll be there.
And partake.
Now I think it's over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm here, I'm honored to introduce John Cathro Consulting. John is a registered professional forester. He's called the Kootenays home for 30 plus years. He's been working with the City of Nelson and the Nelson Fire Department for the past decade in helping make Nelson a more safe community through mitigation and resiliency techniques, preparedness, as well. Monica Niederend from BA Blackwell is remote, and they've partnered together to transform what was originally our community wildfire protection plan into a more modernized community wildfire resiliency plan, which is kind of a more well-rounded full suite of focuses for the safety of the community. So I'll hand it over to John.
Thank you, Chief. Do I just press the down button here to change the slides? Awesome, thank you. Nice to see so many familiar faces, and I say that because I've seen many councillors at volunteer events and taken a great interest. Monica, who works with Blackwell, who's in the office in North Vancouver, Blackwell is seen to be experts in the field of wildfire risk reduction, and they've helped on this CWRP as well as the one that we did in 2015. Thank you, Monica, for everything. I'll be making the presentation because I live in Caslow, and for those of you who care, I'm moving to Nelson in August. And Kate, that's a hockey thing that we're moving.
I wasn't gonna guess.
Yeah. We've got a very brief presentation. This is for information purposes. We're not looking to have the plan endorsed at this point, but we will work with staff to move it towards formal adoption, which is part of the CWRP. Maybe some numbers to start out. This is the second CWRP that Nelson has done that Blackwell and I have been a part of. They last for about 10 years, but the province is changing their methodology a little bit. There's 33 recommendations that come out of this. And the chief and his staff are in charge of understanding those and implementing those recommendations. And those are broken down into 7 what we call fire smart disciplines. And so I'll summarize briefly what those disciplines are and what the recommendations mean. And at any time, if you want to ask questions or I say something you don't understand, by all means, jump right in. Maybe define some terms. I think many of you already know a lot of this stuff. The WUI, as we say, is the wildland urban interface. It's quite straightforward. It's where the forest meets the community or infrastructure. In the spirit of provincial evolution, they changed the definition every few years, and they went from 2 kilometers to 1 kilometer in this iteration. It doesn't really change anything. It doesn't mean that fire behavior has changed or anything like that. It just, the provincial responsibility is different in relationship to municipalities. There's some interesting differences between intermix and interface, and as the arrows suggest, Blewett and those more outlying areas where you've got fewer structures are more of an intermix, and interface is more Fairview and those areas that back right up against the community. I've mentioned the WUI. The definition has changed. We've looked at the municipality and, of course, as well as Nelson Hydro, because there's municipal land beyond just what people think of as the city of Nelson. And what's interesting about the work that we do is it's fundamentally focused on understanding the fire risk on publicly owned land as opposed to private land. As we'll talk about when we get the recommendations, a huge part of what we need to do is empower residents to fire smart their own residents. But you can see from the gray area on this map that the province and the municipality are unable to really determine what the risk is in that area. So although we can say that only 25% of the municipality is at a moderate or high risk, we need to recommend that that's actually only representing about 20% of the total area because of so much private land. The risk on the private land can only be determined through fire smart assessments, which Chief Hebert and his staff do on a very consistent basis, and that's really how we determine that risk on private land. So the numbers here are important, but it's a little bit misleading to think that only 5% is extreme because of we've kept out the private land from this assessment. And that's provincial methodology. That's not a Nelson thing.
These threat levels obviously modulate through the year. Like it's right now we're wet, and I know at the forest station it says low threat. So I'm just wondering, is this a snapshot of like one time of year, or is this a conglomerate over the whole year? Like how are these percentages formulated?
That's a great question. It's based on provincial methodologies And so not only is it different in Nelson from season to season, but it's very different in Nelson than it might be in Cranbrook or in Tofino, for obvious reasons. It's meant to provide decision makers and land managers with an understanding of where to focus their attention. So not to take away from the science, but in a lot of ways, the risk exists even after a week of solid rain that we've seen right now. And spending money and resources and attention on those areas that are extreme and moderate is money well spent even in the rain. Because we know we're going to be getting 50, 60, 70 days without rain in the summer. So,
Yeah, and of course, exacerbated by the acceleration of climate change.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
So let's get to the 7 recommendations, and I'll go through them fairly quickly. If you have any questions about them, these are very well defined, as FireSmart calls them, disciplines. FireSmart is a national organization with very strong representation in BC, and their whole purpose is to empower communities to address the 7 disciplines as the community sees fit. The most important one is education. In really simple terms, 50% of any of the work that Nelson Fire and Rescue and everybody else does reduces the risk of wildfire, and the other 50% is educating ourselves and our neighbors and people who haven't quite done it yet. And that education piece is huge. A couple of weeks ago, we had a very successful demonstration education project up on the rail trail. Councillors Page and Payne and Woodward were there. It was, everybody learned a lot about it. There was great media, probably 300 people on bikes and with dogs walk by, and it's just a great example of how important it is to tell the story and to let people know what we're doing and basically try and demystify it for people. There's a whole bunch of different ways to do it. And Chief Hebert's staff is doing everything from social media to the open house tomorrow night is a great example as well, and I hope to see everybody there. Legislation and planning. Legislation and planning really ties into all of the other work that you're doing that are adjacent to or somewhat related to climate change broadly and wildfire risk reduction more specifically. And so part of the plan is to make sure that we're up to date on all of that work that's being done, in particular the Source Water Protection Plan, the Nelson Next Climate Plan, making sure that we understand that, and to make sure that the work that's been done by other departments or other agencies, other staff, is front and center with Chief Hebert and his staff. And that's really, really important because we don't want to have silos around this stuff. Development considerations, I think, speaks for itself. This is to make sure that we've got trained people to understand how to reduce the risk of wildfire around infrastructure, critical infrastructure like emergency operations centers. And through time, build that into the building code so that staff in hardware stores understand what is the difference between flammable material and all of that sort of stuff. And again, it comes back to collaboration and education. Cross-training. I was up today with Scott Jeffrey at an area above Svoboda where City of Nelson, RDCK, BC Wildfire Service will be doing in the fall cross-training for prescribed burning. The whole idea is to do it in a very highly visible area so that people can understand what we're doing. And as it may seem a bit odd, but it's not common to bring these agencies together that have a common purpose around wildfire risk reduction and do joint training like this. And this is like a next step. This isn't just a tabletop exercise and looking at slides. This is getting out there and understanding where the hose lines is going to go and how to communicate and how to make sure that people aren't worried about the smoke and all of that sort of stuff. And it's going to be a really successful project, and it's going to raise eyebrows, but I think at the end of the day, it's really going to demonstrate the leaders that Nelson is. There's a lot of other opportunities with cross-training, and that collaboration with BC Parks and with forest managers and others is really, really important. couple more slides. Interagency cooperation, this speaks to collaboration. For 4 or 5 years, Nelson has hosted a Fire Smart committee. It brings together BC Parks, Regional District, BC Wildfire Service, Ministry of Forests, so that decisions around Nelson are made in the most effective manner. And some of the outcomes of that are, last year Nelson applied for funding so that BC Parks could do fuel management around the 5 Mile intake. And the provincial funders looked at this and said, what do you mean the city of Nelson wants to do work in a park? And they needed to be sort of brought up to speed on that. Some of you were there. Hugely successful project. You can't do that if you're not meeting at a table with other land managers in the area and having that sort of conversation. The last 2 of the 7 disciplines, emergency planning. I was talking to Heather on the way down here, and I guess you guys are lining up for quite a significant emergency planning process with academics out of BC and Alberta that are looking at communities and how we really do emergency planning in a different way. You can't talk about wildfire resilience without also talking about wildfire response and evacuations and that sort of stuff. And again, that comes back to collaboration, but it also really speaks to the need to be very well prepared for these things.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'm wondering, as we talk about this and what's happening across Canada right now, I would imagine there's lessons being learned right now. Do you think that the responses that are happening to these incredible wildfires are like, is this kind of emergency mindset happening across Canada? Are there like places that are doing much better than other places? I'm just wondering because there's so many fires going on right now. So I imagine there's a lot of interagency communications going on. I just wanted your take on what's happening right at the moment.
I'm going to defer to the expert on this. You probably know way more about this than I do. You're talking about the wildfires that are happening in northern British Columbia.
Yes, and all through Alberta and Quebec,
back east and
Nova Scotia
and stuff like that. I can't speak for what the other provinces are doing for Fire Smart. What a lot of those communities have that we don't have is flat land.
Right.
And we're lucky that we live at the bottom of a watershed with a large lake, and the West Kootenays is classified as interior rainforest, and we have slope working to our advantage. We don't have long periods of intense winds like some of those areas can. The fire right now that's in between Fort St. John and Fort Nelson, the largest fire in Canadian history, 500,000 hectares probably by now, flat country,
right?
Very remote, only no communities.
Right.
Nelson is the largest municipality in the West Kootenays, and we've taken that seriously. Obviously, I'm not saying that the other communities haven't, but we have a very specific focus on where we're protecting. And those fires that have occurred have kind of they've started out like in remote land,
right.
And large expanses of unpopulated country, and with the wind and the flat country, they're just given the opportunity to grow. Where the visuals around here, the conscientious people, the recreational users, all provide advance warning for a lot of our incidents, and we have the opportunity with BC Wildfire having 2 bases really close by, unlimited water supply, that we can action these fires very fast. If you remember last year, 49 Creek Fire, they had an immense amount of air support on that fire. And so we're very lucky that we live where we live. I think we all know that and appreciate that in more than one way. And we're setting ourselves up for success with the work that we're doing with the community welfare.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you very much. I mean, just like it's going to be a year to study, but I think that the geography really, it's kind of very unique situation here.
Yes, and I'm crossing my fingers. So all the conversations I've had with BC Wildfire is that the June rain will predict the fire season.
Yes.
So don't think that the June rain is dampening your camping. It is saving us where a lot of other places in British Columbia aren't faring so well. I was at a fire chiefs conference in the week I was there. I literally saw 3 fires start. From the community, you could see all 3 of them. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I just jump on with one quick question? You mentioned something that I just want to make sure that everybody's aware of, because I only learned it when I moved into this valley. So slope working to our advantage. Can you just explain what that means a little bit more? Because I know we do have a lot of people that have come here recently that might not understand what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. So fire, when they do a risk assessment on areas, slope is very much like wind. So the fire will much rather burn uphill because it preheats the fuels above it, and then it'll treat those fuels as ladder fuels and work up the hill. You will have some back growth, but it'll be at a much reduced pace. Occasionally you'll have logs and debris rolling downhill, which we're trying to manage that by doing some cleanup of the forest fuels around the city of Nelson, but we're a little bit handcuffed because of all the private property. I've said it before, but I mean, we need to figure out a way that we can apply some level of grant funding to private property, and we were successfully able to do it with COVID Restart grant money, where we were able to offer a subsidized fire smart cleanup for at-risk population, elderly people, single mothers, all sorts of stuff, where we could do that fire smart work for the people that can't do it. And that was hugely successful, but it was only a 1-year program for the COVID Restart. So programs like that can help us help our residents that can't necessarily do the work themselves. So we just need to, lobby government organizations to provide that funding, help us offer that funding.
It was an awesome program. I knew a number of people who took advantage of it, and really did the work that wouldn't have been done otherwise. So thanks. So did we cover everything off, or are we still going?
One more slide. Vegetation management is often the thing we think of the most. It's one of the more high visibility and the more public aspects of the 7 disciplines. What the CWRP has done this time around is identified 5 areas that are priorities. That totals about 300 hectares. They need to be assessed, and the actual work on those areas is a few years out. The 2 give out areas, the prescriptions will be written for those areas this year. So the work is being done. And keep in mind that those are 300 hectares, but over the last 10 years, working with BC Parks and RDCK and the work that Nelson has done, there's been over 400 hectares of treatment already done. And so that needs to be put in context. That there's a lot of work to do, but a lot of great work has been done as well.
Okay, I wasn't sure if she was stretching,
No,
but
I'm not
Councillor
stretching.
Tate.
No, I was just trying not to interrupt. Could you just help me interpret this beautiful map? I think I see the orange line, which is the eligible WUI, and it kind of it makes like a little.
Yep.
Okay. I noticed that the eligible WUI goes through private lands.
Yep.
Tell me more about that.
Well, the eligible WUI is a mapping exercise that is 1 kilometer from structural densities of 6 buildings per hectare.
Okay.
So it creates that somewhat funny looking shape. Funding can only be deployed on public land. So the WUI is defined as a line that may cross through private land. That big area immediately upslope of us on the right-hand side, immediately above Nelson, is Anderson Creek Timber. So it's a massive piece of private land. That's an area that we're working with to try and build relationships and understand how we can reduce the risk, recognizing that there, as of right now, is no ability to spend public money on that. And if you were to zoom into that map, you would see, like, all of that gray is private, including the vast majority of the municipality itself. So within the eligible WUI are different ownership types, municipal, provincial, and private of various sorts.
And it looks like there's some RDCK kind of overlap there as well. So do you work in partnership?
Very much so, and up until very recently, the RDCK led the work within the WUI on public land, and increasingly the province is now starting to do that work on Crown land, and the RDCK is still doing very good work. The real focus is to try and get municipalities and local governments focusing inward to the communities, and have the province through BC Wildfire Service and Ministry of Forests looking out for the public land outside of that.
Thank you.
That's it. Questions? I have a question. Who here has done a Fire Smart assessment on their house? You might want to take some phone numbers here.
You could put your hand up anyways.
Not on my house.
It is important stuff. I've done it on my house, so.
I will tell my little story because Scott came over the first year we bought our house, which was about 6 years ago. And at some point in time, someone had planted a row of cedar hedges that were probably this big when they came in, and now they were these 30-foot solid wall. And I said something about not being concerned about it, and he said, well, just imagine a flaming torch being 10 feet from your house.
Yeah.
They're gone now. So it was very worthwhile in my opinion, and there were a few other recommendations that he made. One of the things that I'd love to do next is go out in my neighborhood and do a neighborhood Fire Smart. I would love it if there was some sort of incentive, and I think I talked to the fire department at one point in time about any sort of, hauling away of some of that stuff, and there wasn't funding at the time, but I think that might be something that as a city might be valuable. I don't know. What do you think?
I think taking advantages of what we had just seen previous to us showing up and teaming up with volunteer organizations like the Lions Club, and possibly utilizing them. I mean, we can apply for grant funding to do these, and if we have projects and they provide the labor and we provide the funding, and so I think that might be good opportunities.
Okay, I think Councillor Lochtenberg had his hand up. Is that correct, Rick?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. John, I think this might be for you. I'm not sure. It's related to municipal powers related to fire smarting within municipal boundaries. So can you expand on the limits of the municipality for enforcing or requiring or, particularly sort of dangerous zones? Like, is there a point where you can say this must be done? Is that within the tree cutting bylaw? Can you explain how that would be done?
In some ways, I'm of two minds on this. A lot of me says, thankfully, we do not live in an area where the government could force us to do things. This is entirely voluntary. But we were just at a conference in May, and they had a presentation from firefighters from California, and it's gotten to that point where they literally, it's a mandatory requirement, and the insurance companies and local governments are requiring people to fire smart their communities at a cost if they don't. Here, it's entirely voluntary, and I think, to your point, what's the benefit of getting together? Are there any benefits in getting together with your neighbors? I mean, any opportunity we can get together with the neighbors and do stuff and get to know each other, that there's an inherent built-in benefit to that. The Fire Smart assessments are free. They're done by highly trained people who will give you exactly the information that you want. It's confidential information. It's not shared with your insurance people or your neighbors or anything else, and you can do with that information what you want. It's very, very valuable to do. If you're interested in the efficacy of Fire Smart, there's been very, very good studies in places like Fort McMurray that were devastated, and the homes that didn't burn were Fire Smart. And so it's backed up by science. And I think back to education, I think, Rick, we can help each other and our neighbors and others understand just the built-in inherent benefit of doing this work. As of right now, even the insurance companies are very silent about this stuff, but they're watching very closely. And last month, you're probably following this, insurance companies in California are now not insuring new builds in certain zones because of the wildfire risk.
So I think Councillor Woodward and then Councillor.
I have one thing to add to that. The only exception to that is if your municipality has a development permit area.
Right.
And so we have one. It covers the perimeter. It's not the same distance from the interface all the way across, but it covers the perimeter of the city. It borders the Burlington Northern Railway track because that's the edge of the city limits. It changes in dimensions depending on land ownership. But that development permit area allows us to mandate certain building requirements, and FireSmart is one of them. So we do have a development permit area. I believe the CWRP does recommend expanding that development permit area further into the city. Ember showers can travel up to 1 kilometer, and then that's the one time that slope works against you, is if there's a fire uphill and there's a downdraft, then the embers can travel further. So there is a risk of those embers coming further into the city than normal. We're talking internally, myself and Development Services, on ways that we can still meet the intent of a development permit area without the massive amount of manpower time that it eats, and the permitting process and all the land title registrations, all that sort of stuff. So we're looking at ways to kind of meet the same goal without the burden of a development permit area. So I don't know if that's going to be successful, but we're working towards it. That's a good point.
So I think Councillor
If-
Ferrero had a question?
I think Rick's got something.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I just had a follow-up, but I can wait until after Councillor
I'm
Panero.
looking for your little yellow hand, so this isn't a Zoom call, so we're not going to
Okay.
see that. That's okay.
I don't think you see them up there.
It's hard to catch a hand up, but
Do you? Okay, I'll wait.
Want to go?
Chair, you want to go?
I mean, it's a follow-up on that point,
Go
Jesse.
ahead.
So either way.
Be explicit.
Okay, so then I was gonna ask then, in terms of the development permit area, it appears from my understanding that there's no grandfathering in, like in the official community plan process, we can expand or redefine development permit areas, and as we will. And so then, am I, first of all, to your understanding, am I correct in that? Is it possible to sort of just define the new development permit area through the OCP process? Is that how we do it? I guess.
Don't know that it was set up through Development Services. They would need to comment on the process on expanding that. I'm not sure if Chris knows the process or not, but it was quite something to set up originally. I don't know how easy it is to adapt and to modify it.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. Well, I'm not specifically familiar with revising a DPA within an OCP. I think the heavy lifting is done getting that sort of enabling the DPAs within the OCP document. And I know that the RDCK just recently spent fair jag grant money getting wildfire DPAs developed by a consultant that part of the purpose of the project was to be able to share it with neighboring local governments. So it's certainly something that we can look into deeper. As far as timing on that, we'd have to get back to you, but seems well timed with the OCP coming through.
My thoughts exactly. Thanks for that.
that's the chair.
Yeah, so a couple things. I mean, I just wanted to thank you for bringing up topography, because I've always kind of felt this. I know that wildfire is really high on people's minds here, and I know a few people personally that are very stressed out about it. But it's good to remember that it's not like fire, and it's not all equal. Like, we are not California, and we're not Fort Mac, and the way that we are here, like, the probability of a flame front flattening our town is actually really low. And so just to a bit on the education piece about like the people, I think people build this up into their head, and when something like Fort Mac happens, we all sort of tend to flip out and to realize that like that it's very unlikely that that's going to happen here. And at the same time, what may happen here is what we need to prepare for, not what's going to happen in Fort Mac or what's happening in California, because topographically we're not in the same situation. We're not in the same drought code as they are. We don't have the same fuels as they do, way less density. The big fires that are happening in the north are, like you said, in very remote areas. There's nobody there. It's burning, it's huge, but we don't see that same kind of thing happening because it's not California, it's this. And so I think an education piece, not to I don't want to be like flippant about it or anything, there's still things that could happen. And so the fire smarting, the challenges around like private land and whatnot, in the real situation where you have a fire coming, and like I've cut a lot of fuel free and I've seen a lot of fuel frees burn over. It's those embers that if we have a big fire up on the hill, which to the north of us is Provincial Park, is it not? Like we don't even
To the
northeast somehow.
Northeast, yeah.
But we don't even fight fires in parks. Like it's not. That's kind of like it's going to happen or it's not. The embers are maybe what we should be more focused on. And then so I'm wondering what our capacity is to fire smart in that way, where every house has a sprinkler on top of it, and if every house were to run that sprinkler, where's that pressure coming from, and are we able to sustain that, and do we have like pumps and whatnot to supplement our capacity in that
for sure.
way? Yeah,
you bring up some really good points. Fort Mac, Linton, a lot of the major wildfires that have happened and affected communities, there was no flame front that went through those communities. It was the ember shower. And the ember shower, and that's why the fire smart principles are so important, is because those fire smart principles resist, they make your structure more resistant to accepting an ember. Once your house accepts an ember, there's some really, really good footage from Fort Mac on a structure that started on fire 3 times. The fire department showed up, put it out, went away, started on fire again from the embers that got caught in the nooks and crannies, underneath the boards and the decks, in the wood wainscoted pillars of the building, and it was amazing to watch this time-lapse footage of that happening. So in Nelson, what we have to be worried about is structure density. Obviously, the closer the structures are together, the structure, if a structure takes an ember and catches on fire, what you're worried about is structure-to-structure ignition at that point. And you'll see in Fort Mac, you can actually follow and see on maps, they will actually map out the route the fire took, going from unfire smarted house to unfire smarted house. In 2003, when fires took out Kelowna, those houses all had cedar shingles and wood siding houses. I mean, that was the building covenant in those communities at the time. Not a lot of them were fire smarted. The ones that were fared a lot better than the ones that weren't. In Nelson, to your point about the sprinkler systems, we actually have 3 grant-funded studies going on right now. One is to assess exactly what you said. Do we have the water supply to turn on the sprinkler on every house in the city of Nelson? So that's a grant study that's happening right now. The second one is to develop what's called a community protection line. So we're blessed with the Burlington Northern, the old rail bed. That is a really good spot to deploy what is called a community wildfire protection line. BC Wildfire has actually just bought 2 of them from Trident, and it's a 2-kilometer long line that they can deploy. It takes about 3 hours to deploy it. It uses heavy water. We're hoping to use hydrants, where it puts a sprinkler every 100 feet and creates a wet zone around a community. And you could actually run that on streets around communities. It doesn't necessarily have to be the Burlington Northern. High Level has just designed one for theirs. for their, they actually put in a fire break very similar to our Burlington Northern around their community, and they're putting a mass water wet line around their community. So we have a feasibility study happening right now to see if that they can design, see if we have the water to do it, and to design a system for us. They're not inexpensive, but it's just looking at different ways that we can protect our community. The third study is eventually the water intake from 5 Mile to the reservoir will be upgraded. It was built in 1920, so it's going to see the end of life. So instead of decommissioning that line, we might have an opportunity to repurpose it for a wildfire suppression line. And so there's another feasibility study right now to look at if that's viable. So those are two kind of three out of the box kind of things that we're thinking of doing. And they're on the table right now, and we have grant funding to actively do those studies. So stay tuned for more.
Councillor Woodward, did you have a question?
I just wanted to, I feel like that experience I had with the 40 people removing fuel loads on the rails trails, 2 hours, I don't know, a couple tons of wood came out of the 15 meters off the trail. And I just felt like that was a model of, I mean, we could help people fire smart, for example, or help an area of Nelson, or 10 houses we could fire smart at a time with 40 people. Or so I'm kind of thinking, like, as you roll forward, this idea of having these concentrated work teams of volunteers or volunteer groups helping out, a lot could be done really quickly. And I think what I felt like when I arrived at that event, it was like kind of overwhelming. Like, how are we going to do this? Mm. And then 2 hours later, I was like, this group did this, and it was incredible, and it was such a good feeling. So I hope that can continue, that kind of those kind of events.
Yeah, we're always looking at new innovative ways of a lot of that was education. Right. Yeah, absolutely. We cleaned up a lot of the coarse woody debris and did some tree spacing and brushed up the ladder fuels, which was all good work. But like to John's point, 50% of that was educating people on taking that so that they could do it to their own properties as well.
For sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. Are we good?
Yeah,
Have
great.
we exhausted the amount of questions? That has been an incredible amount of information you have shared with us, and hopefully residents watching in or watching it at some point later on, to just understand both our vulnerability, but also our resilience and the incredible strategic planning that is taking place to increase that level of resilience for us to remain the incredibly unique and special place that we are. So thanks for coming in. Oh, Councillor Tate's going to close us out with some.
I have a question. So you guys are an official delegation, and there's a really lovely, ginormous report behind the slides in the agenda for everyone who wants to look. I noticed that there's the 33 recommendations there, and a lot of these align with the current strategic pillars, let alone the ones that are forthcoming. So this gets forwarded to staff semi-automatically because it's a delegation, and looks at the 33 recommendations and what could possibly go on a work plan? Is that the usual order of operations?
Yeah, and it came from staff as well through the fire department there. So
Okay.
yeah, this report, Jeff.
Yeah, it was.
So it counts as you?
Sorry?
It counts as coming from fire, not from John?
That's correct.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So part of the process is we did staff review and comments on it.
Okay.
That was done at this stage. I believe we're at stakeholder review now.
We're just finishing the stakeholder review, the very minor edits coming from adjacent experts, and the final report will be done this month, and it'll be presented through a process I'm not entirely clear on for adoption by mayor and council.
And it is in the strategic plan as a priority. The CWRP is one of the action items in the strategic plan.
Thank you.
Awesome. So I think that's it. Thank you, John. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Monica. Thanks.
Thank you, Monica, out there.
Thanks, Rick.
That was great.
Thanks, Rick.
And thank you, Monica.
And what's the last thing on our agenda?
Adjournment?
Adjournment.
Motion to adjourn. It looks like Councillor Page had his hand up before I even said in a second, and it's a wrap.
All those in favor?
Oh, all those in favor. Oh, gosh. There should,
Thanks, everyone.
there should be
Thanks for staying.
awards for those guys. I think if you stay to the end, you should get a reward, but,
We should have, yeah, we should definitely have treats at the end.
yeah. Oh, and I didn't even get to use the gavel.
You
done.
should have gavels. I'm looking for the bird lady that, where was the